On a rain-soaked street in a fading southern town, a young girl hurried home after an exhausting shift, her fingers curled tightly around her last few dollars, the coins and crumpled bills heavy with the weight of necessity. As she passed a stalled truck, she noticed an elderly man slumped beside it, his clothes drenched, his face etched with defeat, ignored by the stream of passers-by who hurried through the downpour. Without a second thought, she stopped, offering everything she had to help him. She couldn't know that this simple act of kindness would alter the course of her life in ways she'd never imagined. Before we dive into this story, share where you're watching from in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine, as the sun struggled to pierce a sky choked with thick, rolling clouds, casting the small town of Willow Creek, Tennessee, into a muted haze of gold and gray. The streets, scarred with cracks and patched haphazardly over decades, wound past sagging porches where paint peeled like old skin, and yards overgrown with tangled weeds told silent stories of struggle and forgotten dreams. At the corner of Cedar and Fourth, in a weathered house with warped shutters and a mailbox dangling by a single rusty screw, lived Clara Evans, a 14-year-old girl whose smile shone like a beacon in a place that had long since dimmed. Inside that house, the air carried the faint aroma of aged books, fried cornbread, and the sharp tang of medicinal ointment, drifting from the bedroom where Grandma Elsie lay, her soft coughs muffled by a handkerchief worn thin from years of use. Clara moved swiftly through the narrow halls, her worn sneakers scuffing against the faded linoleum floors, balancing a chipped wooden tray that held a bowl of watery vegetable soup and a glass of tap water, filled only halfway to avoid spills. Her arms, though slender, were steady from years of carrying burdens heavier than her frame suggested. Her hair, tied back with a frayed ribbon the color of faded lilacs, bounced slightly as she walked, and her warm brown eyes held a quiet strength, the kind that came from learning too soon that life offered no easy paths. After setting the tray beside her grandmother's bed, Clara leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to Elsie's fever-warm forehead, feeling the heat that worried her more than she'd admit. "I'll be back soon, Grandma," she whispered, her voice soft but firm with promise. "Rest now." She slipped out the front door, pulling her second-hand jacket tighter against the sharp, cool breeze that swept down the street, carrying whispers of the rain that would soon intensify. Clara had a shift at Mr. Brody's corner store, just a few blocks away, and every dollar she earned, every nickel or dime tucked into the fraying pocket of her jacket, meant another meal on the table, another pill from the pharmacy they could barely afford, or a few more days of keeping the lights on. The neighborhood around her was a patchwork of faded hopes. Children in threadbare clothes played with makeshift toy sticks and bottle caps in dusty front yards, while old men rocked slowly on creaky porches, their eyes narrowed with suspicion honed by years of disappointment. Mothers, their steps heavy with exhaustion, carried grocery bags that seemed to weigh more than their own weary bodies. Most people in Willow Creek kept their heads bowed, their minds consumed by the daily grind of survival, and smiles were a currency rarer than gold. Yet Clara carried one everywhere she went, a genuine, unguarded smile that could make even the most hardened soul pause and remember what hope felt like, if only for a fleeting moment. She shared her warmth freely, even with strangers, offering the broken bits of candy Mr. Brody let her take home from the store to the wide-eyed kids who pressed their noses against the shop's smudged windows, their pockets empty of coins but full of longing. Just a week earlier, she'd given her only lunch, a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper, to old Sam, the town's weary drifter, who sat slumped against the wall of the gas station, his hands trembling, his eyes too tired to hold on to hope. Clara hadn't hesitated, hadn't dwelled on how her own stomach would twist with hunger later that night when the store closed and dinner was nothing more than a glass of water and a fleeting dream of something more. The people of Willow Creek noticed her, of course, but their reactions were mixed. Some shook their heads, muttering that kindness was a fool's errand when you had nothing to spare. Others sneered, calling her soft, too tender-hearted, for a world that ground down girls like her without a second thought. But Clara didn't seem to care what they thought. Deep in her fierce, stubborn heart, she held a quiet belief that kindness wasn't about what you got back. It was about being the one small spark in a town that had forgotten how to shine. And so, under the heavy, bruised sky of a tired Tennessee afternoon, Clara Evans sprinted down uneven sidewalks, past crooked mailboxes and silent houses, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her scuffed shoes kicking up tiny clouds of dust as she chased a future that always seemed just beyond her reach. But she ran, because even the faintest flicker of hope was a powerful force, one she refused to let die. The storm that night showed no mercy, hammering Willow Creek with a relentless fury that turned streets into rivers and gutters, into roaring streams. Inside Ellie's diner, the old fluorescent lights flickered nervously, as if they, too, shivered in the cold. Clara sat across from the elderly man she'd found by the truck, the dampness seeping into her bones, making her teeth chatter despite the chipped mug of watery coffee she cradled in her hands. She glanced at the clock ticking above the counter, its hands moving too fast, and felt a sharp pang of panic. Grandma Elsie's medicine, the overdue rent, the looming electricity bill, they flashed through her mind like warning signs on a lonely highway. She couldn't afford mistakes, couldn't afford to linger. And yet, here she was, sitting with a stranger, watching him struggle to warm himself, his hands trembling around his own coffee mug. Every part of her knew she couldn't just walk away. When the waitress, a tired woman named Margie, slapped the bill down with a grunt, Clara reached into her pocket, pulling out every crumpled dollar and coin she had. Her heart sank as she counted. It wasn't enough. Not even close. Her stomach twisted into a tight knot as the reality settled in. She had to do something more, something drastic. Without a word, she grabbed her backpack and stood, the chair scraping loudly against the worn linoleum, drawing curious glances from the handful of other patrons, hunched over their plates. Clara forced a smile at the old man, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Stay here," she said softly. "I'll be back." The rain pelted her as she dashed into the night, her sneakers slipping on the slick pavement, her breath coming in sharp gasps as her mind raced faster than her feet. She had one thing of value, her phone, a battered old smartphone, with a cracked screen and a charger that worked only when coaxed just right. It was her lifeline for emergencies, for school assignments, for calling Grandma Elsie when her shifts at the store ran late. But now, looking back at the diner's glowing windows, where the old man sat alone and shivering, she knew there was no real choice. The pawn shop, 3 blocks away, was her only hope to get enough money for a tow truck. She hated the idea, hated the thought of losing something so essential. But the image of the old man's defeated posture pushed her forward. The pawn shop reeked of stale air and regret, its shelves cluttered with the remnants of other people's desperation: old guitars, tarnished jewelry, forgotten dreams. The clerk, a wiry man with greasy hair and a permanent scowl, barely looked up as Clara stumbled in, dripping water across the grimy floor. She slapped the phone onto the counter, her jaw tight. "How much can you give me for this?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. The clerk squinted at the phone, poked at its cracked screen, and muttered something under his breath before shrugging. $45, he said, his tone flat, offering no sympathy. Clara's heart screamed in protest. $45 was a pittance, barely enough to make a dent in what she needed, but it was better than nothing. She snatched the money, the damp bills sticking to her fingers, and ran back into the storm, her lungs burning. Clara had helped lift a small piece of it away. When the driver hooked up the old pickup and hauled it onto the tow truck, Clara stood beside the man on the sidewalk, her wet jacket clinging to her skin, her shoes squelching with every step. She should have been exhausted, should have been furious with herself for giving up so much for a stranger. But as the truck rumbled off into the night, its taillights fading into the mist, she felt a strange, fierce sense of peace settle over her, warm and uncheckable. The old man turned to her, his voice rough with emotion. "Why'd you do all this, girl? You don't even know me." Clara met his gaze, looking past the lines etched in his face, the worn clothes, the weight of his years, and saw someone the world had left behind. Just like so many others in Willow Creek. She shrugged, a small, almost defiant gesture, and said simply, "Because someone's got to start being kind first." The old man stared at her for a long moment, his eyes blinking rapidly as if fighting back something heavy. He didn't say thank you, he didn't need to. On that rain-slicked street, under a sky still bruised but beginning to clear, their unspoken understanding hung between them, a quiet bond forged in the storm. And deep within Clara's shivering frame, despite everything she'd given up, a tiny spark of warmth flickered to life and refused to fade. The days that followed moved slowly, heavy with the weight of routine, like molasses dripping in winter. The storm had passed, but Willow Creek's sky remained stubbornly gray, cloaking the town in a tattered veil that refused to lift. Clara trudged through her days with a weariness she couldn't shake. The absence of her phone a constant ache, missed homework assignments, no way to check on Grandma Elsie during long shifts, no quick calls to ease her worrying. She told herself it didn't matter, that helping the old man had been worth it. That kindness was its own reward. But in the quiet hours before dawn, as the kitchen faucet dripped its endless rhythm into the sink, doubts crept in like unwelcome guests, gnawing at her resolve. She hadn't seen the old man since that night. He hadn't returned to the diner, hadn't sent word. Maybe he was just another wanderer passing through. Her sacrifice washed away like the rain in the gutters. Maybe her kindness had been for nothing. It was a Tuesday afternoon, sagging under its own weight, when the world shifted without warning. Clara was restocking shelves at Mr. Brody's store, stacking cans of beans with dented edges, her arms sore, her stomach growling from another skipped lunch, when the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside broke her focus. She barely glanced up, assuming it was another delivery truck. Maybe Mr. Willis with his rattling old van. But the door's bell gave a sharp, almost startled jingle, and the store fell into an unnatural hush. Clara turned, wiping her hands on her jeans, and froze in place. Parked outside was a long, gleaming limousine, its chrome grille flashing like a predator's grin under the muted daylight. Standing in the doorway, shaking water from a freshly opened umbrella, was a man she barely recognized at first, the old man from the diner, but utterly transformed. Gone were the tattered coat and scuffed boots. Now he wore a tailored suit, its fabric sharper and more expensive than anything Willow Creek had ever seen. His white hair neatly combed, his posture straight and commanding, exuding an air of quiet authority. His piercing blue eyes swept the room, sharp and assessing, until they settled on Clara, softening with a warmth that made her breath catch. The world seemed to tilt, the cheap fluorescent lights buzzing louder, the air thick with the scent of stale bread and old mop water. Mr. Brody's mouth hung open, his hand frozen over a customer's change. The few shoppers in the store gawked, whispering behind cupped hands, their voices a low hum of curiosity and disbelief. The man, not just any man, stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking deliberately on the scratched tile floor. He stopped in front of Clara, his gaze softening further, a smile breaking across his face, warm and tinged with something like pride. "Clara Evans," he said, his voice deep and steady, the kind that commanded rooms and made people listen. "I've been looking for you." Clara's throat tightened, her words tangling before they could form. "Sir, she started, but the words dissolved under the weight of his presence. "My name is Edward Thornton," he continued, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a slim leather wallet, flashing a card embossed with the insignia of Thornton Holdings, a real estate empire known across the Southeast. Its name splashed on billboards and news reports. Clara had seen but never connected to her small, forgotten town. "I own the land surrounding Willow Creek. I came here quietly, not as a businessman but as a man, to see this place for myself, to understand its people, its spirit, without the polish of guided tour or flattery. I wanted to know if there was anything left here worth saving." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, and Clara felt her knees tremble, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break free. Edward Thornton, the Edward Thornton, had been the man she'd helped in the rain, the man no one else had spared a glance. "And you," he said, his voice lowering so only she could hear. "You were the only one who saw me, not a deal to be made, not a headline to chase, just a man who needed help." Clara shook her head, her mind reeling, unable to grasp the enormity of it all. I wasn't trying to," she stammered. But he cut her off with a warm, genuine laugh that seemed to fill the room. "I know you didn't," he said. "That's exactly why it matters." He turned slightly, gesturing to a man in a crisp gray suit standing just outside the door, who stepped forward, carrying a thick envelope and a set of keys that glinted in the dim light. Edward took them and pressed them gently into Clara's trembling hands, his touch steady and reassuring. "In this envelope," he said, "you'll find a full scholarship to any university you choose, along with private tutoring to prepare you for the journey. There's also the deed to a newly renovated home for you and your grandmother, fully furnished, paid in full, and a trust fund to ensure you never have to sacrifice your phone or anything else to help a stranger again." Clara could hardly breathe, her fingers clutching the keys, their cool metal grounding her in a moment that felt like a dream. The weight of the envelope in her hands was real, solid, overwhelming. She opened her mouth to protest, to say it was too much, that she couldn't possibly accept such a gift, but Edward shook his head, his expression kind but unyielding. "You earned this, Clara," he said firmly, "not because you asked for it, but because you gave when you had nothing left to give." Behind her, Mr. Brody coughed awkwardly, swiping at his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to hide the tears that glistened there. Around the store, the whispers grew louder, some pointing, their faces a mix of eye and shame for having ignored the old man, shame that it was Clara, the skinny girl with hand-me-down sneakers and a smile, too big for her weary frame, who had shown them what it meant to be truly human. For the first time in what felt like forever, Clara stood tall, the rain outside forgotten, the gray sky breaking open, just enough to let a shaft of golden sunlight pour through the store's smudged windows, warm and radiant, bathing her in a glow that felt like hope made visible. Weeks passed, and Willow Creek began to hum with a new energy, a slow, rising buzz like the first crackle of a summer storm after a long drought. Where broken windows once gaped like wounds, new glass gleamed clean and strong. Potholes that had rattled bones and axles were filled smooth, and yards once choked with weeds now wore fresh grass like proud new suits. Laughter real, unguarded laughter drifted through the air, carried on warm breezes that smelled of possibility and renewal. Clara's world had transformed, too, in ways she'd never dared to imagine. The new house was beyond anything she'd dreamed. A sturdy, spacious home with a reliable heater that hummed softly through the cold nights, a roof that held firm against the rain, and a soft bed where Grandma Elsie could rest without the chill seeping through drafty windows. Some mornings, Clara woke with a start, her heart racing, half convinced it was all a cruel trick of her mind. But then she'd hear the cheerful whistle of the kettle from the kitchen and Grandma Elsie's off-key, humming as she shuffled about, and the truth would settle deep in her bones. This was real. Edward Thornton didn't vanish after handing over the keys. True to his word, he kept showing up, sometimes arriving in the sleek limousine that turned heads in Willow Creek, other times strolling in on foot, a coffee cup in one hand, a folded newspaper tucked under his arm. He'd ask about Clara's schoolwork, tease her about expecting nothing less than top grades since he was, as he put it with a wink, her personal investor. He wasn't just rebuilding Willow Creek with his wealth, he was breathing life back into it with his presence, reminding the townsfolk that their home, their lives, still mattered. Clara was no longer just the girl from the rough side of town, the one who worked long hours and wore patched clothes. She became a symbol, a living testament that kindness wasn't weakness but a strength that could move mountains. The day of the new school's grand opening dawned bright and warm, a perfect spring day that felt like a gift whispered from the heavens. The entire town gathered in the freshly paved parking lot, dressed in their Sunday best, their faces flushed with excitement and a touch of disbelief. Colorful banners snapped in the gentle breeze, and balloons bobbed against a sky so blue it seemed to promise forever. Clara stood behind the podium, her hands trembling as she gripped the speech she'd spent days crafting. The words scribbled in neat letters that blurred before her nervous eyes. She could see Grandma Elsie in the front row, a vibrant green scarf tied proudly around her silver hair, waving with a grin that made Clara's heart swell. She saw Mr. Brody, Mr. Willis, even the gruff pawnshop clerk, all crowded together, watching, waiting, and standing slightly apart, arms folded across his chest, a quiet smile tugging at his lips, was Edward Thornton. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the words settle in her chest like stones finding their place in a riverbed. Her voice, when it came, was soft at first, trembling with nerves, but it grew stronger with every syllable, carrying across the silent crowd. Kindness, she said, her words clear and steady, costs nothing, but it can change everything. When I helped a stranger, I didn't know it would change my life. I only knew it was the right thing to do. We're all part of each other's stories. We can be the hand that lifts someone up, or the one that lets them fall. I hope we choose to lift. The crowd held its breath, a moment of stillness so profound it felt sacred, and then it erupted clapping, cheering, some whistling through their fingers, others dabbing at their eyes with crumpled tissues. Clara smiled, wide and unashamed, feeling something bright and fierce bloom inside her, something unstoppable. Later, as the ribbon was cut and children swarmed into the gleaming new school, their laughter echoing like music, Clara wandered the edge of the crowd, soaking in the joy, the warmth, the impossible reality of it all. She felt a tug at her sleeve and looked down to see a small boy, no older than 6, his shoes untied, his face sticky with cotton candy, holding out a half-melted lollipop, with a grin that showed a gap where his front teeth should be. Without hesitation, Clara knelt, accepting the lollipop with exaggerated solemnity, her smile as bright as the sun overhead. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm and sincere. "You have no idea how much this means." Nearby, Edward Thornton's deep, rich laugh rolled across the parking lot, a sound like a promise that better days were just beginning. Willow Creek had found its light again, sparked by a girl who had nothing but gave everything. And as long as Clara was there, that light would burn bright, unwavering, a beacon for all who needed it. Join us to share stories that matter by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start Your day with lessons of heart and hope.